that's a great introduction. Jenny's also my favorite person in the world, so I guess we shared that. But hello, everybody. It's been a long day, so thanks for the lighthearted introduction, and I'll try to keep it a bit lighthearted, despite the maybe not so lighthearted market climate. But for anyone who's new to the bear market, have a good bear market, and let's talk a bit about it. When you are in a bear market, you think less about prices and you think more about building stuff, and that's what my talk is about. And maybe to tell you why I'm going to talk about this and sort of how I got here. Very brief introduction. My name's Vogelsang. Originally Swiss, spent a bit of time in Berlin, now not anymore, but always happy to be back. But really, like I can say, I've been building startups, building projects for my pretty much entire career. It feels like my entire life. I've spent about 10 years in Web 2, and after that, 5 years in Web 3. In 2017, I started looking into Ethereum and kind of like realized that, okay, blockchains are more than Bitcoin, and digital money, digital cash, is not nearly as exciting as programmable money, which at the time was Ethereum, right? And sort of now, 5 years later, I'm here on stage talking about Polkadot, which I think is going to, in a similar way, show people just how much bigger and how much better we can do things in finance, in the digital world overall. So I am going to talk about finance, and I said I grew up being a techie, being a nerd at home, hacking on my computer, and I always thought of finance people as people wearing suits, being boring, only caring about money and doing stuff that was generally useless. And I have to say my perception changed quite a bit, and I myself have been mostly thinking about finance the last couple of years. And so I'll try to talk a bit about that, and I'll try to say why I actually do think it's important and why I started caring about it, and why I think as the devs that are here, as the builders that are here, we should try to build a better financial system so that we make finance suck a bit less. So what is finance? What is money? Ultimately, well, like, it is a lot of things, but like one key thing that I always focus on, money is kind of like the fuel that can turn ideas into reality, right? Like if you want to build a business, you want to do something, everyone here, we need money to employ people, to pay for stuff, to go and build out our vision and enable kind of innovation to happen, right? And so it's a very vital part in anything that we do. But the problem is, like, it's hard to get access to capital when you not already have a lot of capital, right? And that's kind of like summarizes the financial system we are in today, right? If you have capital, getting more capital is almost free. If you don't have it, well, then you're shit out of luck. Actually, sort of to put a number on that, like our financial system, the intermediaries, the bankers, the fund managers, the lawyers, they're the placement agents, right? There's like the dozens of intermediaries. Like that whole industry is estimated somewhere between 10 and 20% of our global GDP, right? So like think about it. Like every dollar spent, like 20 cents go to a banker for what? For allocating capital more efficiently. And you kind of wonder, well, how good of a job are they doing, and why do we need so many when we have the internet and when we have blockchains? And so I think largely this was, I think, a motivation for originally the Bitcoin white paper, for a lot of the DeFi, the tokens, the ERC20s that started becoming a thing. And I think this is also, and still very much, a very, very attractive use case, a very interesting sort of direction that we're all going. And I think that Polkadot has a unique position to move forward in. We're trying to build a new financial system together with DeFi, and we're doing that because DeFi, I think, has these three core pillars or core kind of like ideas, motivations in it, right? Like DeFi tries to be open, and the same applies to blockchains, right? You want to be transparent, you want to be trustless. That creates an architecture, like gives us the ability to actually build banks in a way that they can't be co-opted into something they shouldn't do, into ever-growing monsters of kind of inefficiency and like value extraction where they're not needed, where like a simple DeFi lending protocol would do a much better job, right? Like they're kind of trustless so that we don't get screwed like we were in 2008 or recently with COVID. Right, we know that kind of like our financial system today, in a lot of ways, the financial incentives are just wrong. And so to come a bit closer to what we're actually doing, kind of like over the last 5 years, like I saw this DeFi come into existence. I think the term DeFi is about 4 years old now, 3.5 years old. It was like end of 2018 that people started talking about crypto, about blockchains as like sort of becoming a financial system. We started to see the first protocols to build stable coins, money markets, lending protocols, AMMs, exchanges, leverage products, right? All of these things, and we started building block by block the like kind of tools that our traditional financial system has that we now need to reimagine and code. The thing that we haven't managed to do yet, I think, is sort of break out of our crypto bubble. And I was talking about the bull market and the bear market. Well, in the bull market, it was very easy to kind of be like a little caught in VC subsidized yields, growth that is largely coming by an influx of new users that are excited about the space, but not really actually having any organic need. Well, it's a bit different, right? And when I actually originally created the talk and the outline and thought of what I was going to talk about today, well, like 20% risk-free yield still was an idea that most people believed in. Not most people, but a lot of people, I would say. And kind of like you were trying to argue why it wasn't, and I was going to get ready actually to come out to all of you here today and say, hey, like 20% is unreasonable. Like there's no way this makes any sense. I don't need to do that today. I'm very happy about that. I'm not happy about what happened, of course, in the entire crash, but in the end, it will force us to focus on what is actually providing the value, right? And what I think we can do, and what Centrifuge has been focused on within Polkadot and DeFi overall, is to grow Polkadot with real-world use cases, and specifically with real-world assets. I mentioned we've been building a new financial system. What we don't have is we don't have a way yet to bring all these assets that exist around the world, around us in the physical space, the building that we're in, the car that people own, the education that people are getting, the money that is being raised to build a business, right? To bring that into DeFi and start actually replacing how these assets are financed and how people that want to build their business actually get access to that capital. And so to like talk about what the big opportunity is here, right? Like we've kind of built infrastructure. We know the internet, we know blockchains. They're gonna do this kind of like the same way that people knew that the internet was going to be massive and big and do all these things like already in the 90s. But like we can't even imagine yet what blockchains will do in the next 10 years, right? The same way that I think in the 90s people couldn't imagine that I can like take out my phone and like do a video call with anybody, and I basically have this thing on me and have access to any kind of information that is digitally available. I think the consequence of this, in a similar way, of blockchains, of kind of like DeFi, is going to be on the same level, where I can say the people here are probably visionaries, but even us, I think we're going to still have a lot of interesting stuff to learn. But the one thing we do, and the one thing I kind of like hope that we can start scaling and bringing to Polkadot, is kind of like bringing this infrastructure to real-world assets, right? So Centrifuge is kind of like the L1 for real-world assets. We're allowing the people that have a house, that have real estate, that want to borrow against it, to borrow against it and use DeFi, put it into a stable coin as collateral, and mint AUSD, put it into a money market to borrow against it, trade differently as an investor, putting money into a money market and earning yield on something that's a bit more sustainable than the kind of like speculative stuff that is in DeFi today, right? So this has all been kind of like very high level, and without going too much into what we're doing, what Centrifuge does is we're building kind of like an on-chain debt market. We're saying, well, like this one thing that people need in finance, and it's debt. It's the access to capital so they can build stuff. And I think it's one of the most interesting use cases, and it's one of the most kind of like urgent needs of some of the people out there, right? And people talk about the small business credit gap, that small businesses have a much harder time to borrow capital. People talk about banking in emerging markets, where access to capital, again, is much more expensive, much harder, just because there isn't really a market. The existing financial system is failing that whole group of users. And so I think by creating an alternative for these assets, we can actually bring liquidity, which brings lower rates, more transparency, kind of like safer assets for the investors to all these new users. And then ultimately make this compatible with every other parachain, right? So Centrifuge, where we are today, we have about 85 million in TVL. That's 85 million DAI right now in loans that are going out to real borrowers that are lending against their houses or borrowing against their houses, that are emerging markets loans in India, like trade finance receivables, cargo being shipped from China to South America, being financed in transit, right? All these things. We're doing that not by ourselves. I mentioned we started on Ethereum, and Centrifuge has a bit of a history there. And we've done this working with some of the biggest DeFi protocols on Ethereum, and are kind of like very excited to start bringing these assets to Polkadot. Right, like we've been working with Maker as the first real-world asset to go live and actually generate DAI. That has now grown to over 30 million in DAI generated by real-world assets. We're working with Aave on experimenting with money markets and kind of like driving this idea forward. And then also have like a bunch of fintech startups that started coming to us and saying, actually, like, why are we building our new banking infrastructure on old school banking rails, back-end banking rails, right? Like if we're the fintech and the better front end for the world, then like why don't we use the better back end for the world, which is DeFi? And so that's kind of like what we've been focused on, and where I see like us in the bear market and everyone else here in the bear market to keep building, right? Because it is where organic need is. It is where we can actually take blockchain and take this technology and show it to new users that will actually be able to say, yes, like I'm able to get a loan here, and this is very helpful to me, and not I'm able to buy a dog coin and feed my curiosity or gaming addiction. So we're not doing this by ourselves, right? And I think this is sort of looking at crypto, looking at Ethereum. Right? Like DeFi started to explode once we managed to bring interoperability together. I think still like one of the most powerful inventions in DeFi and in today, or up to today, was the ERC20 token. It's extremely simple, but in its simplicity, it lies its power. It means that you can actually very easily interact between different protocols, right? Like as long as something's a token, you can move it from one protocol to another. And that is the power of DeFi. It is the power of the internet to draw this parallel again, right? Like if you have a web browser, you can look at any website in the world, right? If you have an ERC20 token, you can interact with any financial product built in DeFi today in the EVM. Now, this is what XCM is going to look like, I believe, right? Like if we can build sort of like these financial primitives, if we can build standards, then we can all come together, build the best DEXs, innovate on them, kind of use the DEXs that think we make the most sense, give guarantee to people that if there is a better way for someone to trade an asset, then actually that person can just come and say, I'm willing to offer you a better price, and there's no intermediary that can stop you from it, no system that will keep you from doing it, right? So those are some of the use cases that I think are going to be really important. And I think we kind of like need to think of, as we're starting to see Polkadot really to grow, right? Like really the multiplier here is us being able to integrate together, and us, not just Centrifuge, but all these parachains to actually build this new system. Now, the benefit of why I think Polkadot actually has this unique chance of doing something that we haven't seen yet in maybe the EVM world is, I think the power lies in parachains in the combination with XCM, right? Like combining these two very technical terms that maybe people deeply understand today, maybe not, but what it means that we allow for trustless interaction between projects without the need for being all on this one crowded chain, right? So we get the agency we want, but we also get the trustless interaction, the fast communication, right, that's needed. That is possible today with smart contracts, but it's very hard to do across different chains outside of Polkadot. I think sort of talking about DeFi, right, like this easy interaction allows actually for diverse collateral types to enter into stablecoins. It allows for different exchanges to compete for the best model, right? Like in Ethereum, we've gone through about 5 models of AMMs, automated market makers. You had Bancor, never really took off, but was the first project at the time. Then Uniswap V2, Curve, which showed, okay, actually we can do this much more efficiently for stablecoins if we tweak the curve. And then you had Uniswap V3, you had Sushi, you had kind of like all this innovation, right, that was able to happen because we had this open, borderless ecosystem that just encouraged this, right, encouraged forking, encouraged kind of like efficiency at the very core of the infrastructure. And that is where like the secret power comes in, right? And when we're thinking about Polkadot, that's kind of like where I want us to keep thinking about and come together and build together. The one thing that I want to talk a little bit about, kind of like as the last point, what we've been building is what we call connectors, which is kind of like combining the user interface and the cross-chain interactions that happen in Polkadot, but also kind of like making them available to other chains. So connectors for us is like the realization that if we're just fighting for getting the most TVL onto our platform, meaning our parachain, our user, like trying to get everyone in, right? Then we're again like anti-collaboration. We're trying to like fight these very expensive wars. What if we just made it easier for users to use our assets, to access these new assets across different parachains and different EVM chains even, right? And so what we've started building is kind of like a user experience where users can natively use these assets. It goes beyond just bridging, but it's not a fork. And that's maybe where I leave it. And I'll as a bit of a teaser, but we're going to be sharing a lot more about how we kind of think of some of these cross-chain interactions and how those cross-chain interactions can actually become kind of like user-friendly, seamless in a way that, like today, we send ERC20 tokens around. And that's one thing I'm really like kind of looking forward to as we're rolling out more and more on our parachain. But enough about connectors. If you are interested, go check out what we're about to publish online. We're going to be talking a lot about how we use Nomad, different trustless bridges, XCM to really like push the boundaries of what cross-chain interactions have been so far, going beyond to just bridging tokens, which I think is really vital for us to exist in a multi-chain world. But yeah, and I want to kind of end with that. I think we are in this very unique position today where we see the technology and its potential to actually build a new financial system, in a world really that's open and accessible to everybody, and where capital is much more affordable because we managed to kind of like put the entire financial infrastructure on its head. And ultimately, that will be fairer and better and lead to innovation and all this, and even more of this exciting stuff. And so this maybe. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk and my 30-second motivational speak, but hope you take that away from it. And happy building.
We got questions. All right, we have questions on questions.
Oh, yeah,
you're not done.
Yeah.
You're staying with
Great.
me,
Awesome.
Lucas. Come to the podium. All right. Everyone's favorite question. Is Centrifuge optimistic they can overcome regulatory challenges to serve multiple markets in different legal jurisdictions?
Yeah. Touching the real world, it's a blessing and it's a blessing, but also a bit of a curse, because we do have to obviously acknowledge that without legal support, without like having actually a strategy around that, we can't work, right? So legal, like compatibility with legal systems, I don't think is fundamentally impossible in crypto actually, and it just requires a bit more work, and that is what we've been doing. We have been focused on like sort of a US legal setup, and one of the big reasons is because the US actually has a very, very feared SEC, but also actually quite a well-established legal setup for securitizing, for kind of like putting assets into new products, and here it's just a blockchain product. So that's quite it's doable. A bit of an extra cost, I would say.
Great.
But we have great lawyers, so
that's important. How would you prevent a Luna UST-like event on Polkadot? What is your take on leverage?
Well, I would say Luna was not a failure in leverage. Everything that happened after was definitely people getting over-leveraged. But Luna, in the end, like, I think it was lacking enough organic use, right? I don't want to get into the collateralized versus uncollateralized stablecoin discussion. That would take another hour. But ultimately, Luna failed because they subsidized users to a point where if they didn't keep this engine running and it suddenly disappeared, right, then everyone would freak out and try to leave. And that's what happened. I think with stablecoins that are backed by real assets that people believe in, with activity that's backed by this, right? Like this can't happen as quickly. And you actually saw kind of like all these CeFi players, these centralized funds, leveraged hedge funds, right? They all went bust. But I can't think of one large reputable DeFi protocol that suffered severe losses. MakerDAO didn't glitch, right? Like Ethereum itself, like the chain, it all kept working. The decentralized, transparent, kind of like trustless systems that we've built, they've actually proven that in a crazy downturn, they can work. And actually, I think in a way that is actually makes me more bullish on DeFi and not something that we need to worry about.
Right, and this actually goes great into the next question. Security. DeFi is great, but the security is very, very important. What is the plan to ensure the security of Polkadot and limit the exploit of hackers? Over to you, Lucas.
Yeah, I think complexity is the thing we need to fight. I mentioned how simple the ERC20 token is, and I think in the same way it actually makes it easy to build safe stuff. And so Polkadot itself is a very complex technology, and the best thing is if we try to reduce complexity and don't touch and really build simple tooling, very good tooling around it that allows us to kind of like abstract that and build these financial products we're trying to build in a way that we're not exposed to these things. And I think actually there's a lot we can learn from the Ethereum developer tooling and kind of like technology that we've built there, because it is like building a rocket ship, right? And so you have to actually be willing to put the work in to build the rocket and test it in every scenario possible, and kind of like rule out as much as you can before you ship it.
Great. And then, so that's what Altair is for?
Yeah. Yeah. And first you ship it to a smaller test net. I think we have about 5 different test nets, and we ship it to them. We use Altair as a testing ground where we put slightly earlier stage stuff. We try to work in smaller to limit the risk and kind of like push innovation forward. And yeah, definitely it needs to be proven out before it hits Centrifuge for us.
Okay, this is your last question, then I'll let you go. So you mentioned in your talk about bringing real-world assets on-chain. How does Centrifuge bring real-world assets on-chain?
So there's always someone that wants to borrow that has some sort of real-world asset, right? Like I mentioned, I want to buy a house, I need a mortgage, right? We work with fintechs and sort of like these tech companies that have a need to finance these assets because they're originating loans, and they come and work with us to actually kind of like use crypto to get this access to finance. And on the other hand, there's someone in DeFi that wants to buy a token that is backed by real estate. And we kind of build Centrifuge, a parachain, to allow these two people to come together and for a house to be used in a pool that is then invested in by someone else.